The world is changing fast. New technologies are impacting how we think about products, services, and the way we live our lives. Nowhere is this trend more present than in financial services, where new business models and customer expectations are changing our conceptions about banking, finance, and the very nature of money. Welcome to Rebank, a visionary podcast about banking, fintech, and the future. The future of banking is here. Hello and welcome to Rebank. I'm your host, Will Beeson. Ron Suber is the former head of Prosper, one of the original peer-to-peer lenders. Prior to getting involved in Prosper, Ron built and sold Merlin, a tech-first prime broker for the long tail of hedge funds, acquired by Wells Fargo in 2012. Ron invests in and advises a number of fintech companies and has developed views on the space and where it's headed, all of which we get into today. In addition to the insights we deliver through our podcast and newsletter, Rebank offers advisory services to fintechs, banks, and corporates. Drawing on our experience starting, running, and advising fintech businesses, and our vast network of the most impactful fintech entrepreneurs, investors, and innovators around the world, we help companies make sense of fintech, work through specific questions, and optimize proposition and strategy. For more information about our services, please visit bankingthefuture.com. Thank you very much for joining us today. Please welcome Ron Suber. Ron Suber, welcome to Rebank.
Will, great to be on the show. I'm a huge fan.
Well, thank you very much for saying that. Likewise, you have done some amazing stuff in the space. For context, do you want to walk people through your background, kind of the quick intro?
Happy to. I spent 20 years on Wall Street, running around the world, custody finance, hedge funds, securities lending, and became an entrepreneur in the mid-2000s. I partnered up with Aaron Vermouth and Steve Vermouth, a father-son team, and we were backed by Sequoia. And we had a company called Merlin Securities, which did custody and finance for hedge funds under $1 billion. And so we had multiples of hundreds of hedge funds that used us, a profitable company. And we sold that to Wells Fargo in 2012 so that Wells Fargo could become a prime broker and compete with Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley and JP Morgan and some others. And then I created a small family office and started lending money out to companies like Lending Club and Prosper and got to know the online lending world and got so interested in the business and saw the success of Lending Club and others that Aaron and Steve and I left Wells Fargo and we bought Prosper, and Sequoia backed us again. So in January of 13, I started my next entrepreneurial thing with Aaron and Steve and Sequoia, and we had a fabulous time running Prosper for 4 years.
That's fascinating. You clearly bring a lot of experience to this, both more recently with kind of the digital lending, online lending, but previously a deep-rooted sense, I think, in the way that capital markets specifically, but financial services more broadly have always worked. And I guess that's probably what makes you a valuable advisor to a portfolio of companies.
I've made a lot of mistakes, and I'm relatively old, and so I'm able to really share that experience and the wisdom and lessons and the scars that come from some success and some failure. I have investments for my own company of one in 24 companies on the equity side. I'm advising 10 of those companies, and I'm chairman of the board of the 11th company, which is public, credible.com. And then I run a credit fund, and that fund lends out money to businesses that are in the online lending world.
Are there any of those investments of yours that people might recognize?
So I think people will know about Yield Street. We just raised $62 million at a $300+ million valuation. And yesterday they announced on TechCrunch that they bought the Athena art lending business. Of course, Moneyline is one of the leading challenger banks. And then there's payments companies like Avid Exchange and financial inclusion companies like Juvo and companies like DocuSign and SoFi and some of the other really innovative companies. There's one here in San Francisco that people will be learning much more about called Quill, QWIL, which is financing freelancers and independent employees of the gig economy in a brand new way. That one is quite exciting.
All right, so you're clearly doing so much in the space, engaged both at kind of the startup level and the incumbent level, it sounds like. You must have developed views on the broader fintech space and where we are and where we're likely to go. It'd be interesting to get your kind of 30,000-foot view.
So if we back out to 30,000 feet, every innovation cycle, no matter what it was, TV, radio, automobiles, transportation, it's a 50-year innovation cycle. The first 15 years are the early years. And so in fintech, we had E-Trade and E-Loan and PayPal and Square and Lending Club and Prosper and SoFi were that first generation. And now we're in the middle 10 years of that 50-year innovation cycle where you're starting to see some amazing new fintechs come on, like Grab and Affirm and Ant Financial and some of these other big winners that really weren't around in those early years. And what's coming next is really the most exciting part, which is the end of the golden era where the winners really are here. I could give you an example in the telephone business, in the mobile phone business. You and I and many of your older listeners had Nokia phones and Motorola phones and StarTech phones and Good phones and BlackBerry phones. They're all gone. And today we have Xiaomi and the Google phone and the Apple phone in the golden era of mobile. And in the computer business, in the early days, if you're old enough like me, you had an Apollo computer or an Amdahl computer. And then the golden era of computers was HP and Compaq and Gateway, but they're all gone now. And so we have the computers that we have today. And that's the same analogy that I tell to the banks and insurance companies and the incumbents about innovation cycles, that they need to continue to adjust to this next generation, the I generation, that always had an iPhone and always had the internet because they want things in a different way. And they've showed us that in the way they want music. My generation had iTunes, they have Spotify. And Uber and Airbnb are responding to the different needs of this next generation, and so do the incumbents in all areas, not just in the banking area, but in insurance and much more.
So the conversations you're having with incumbents, is it, hey guys, wake up, this is happening, and you're kind of staring at boardrooms full of blank-faced executives, or are people getting a bit more proactive in the way that they're dealing with everything that's going on?
So in the early days, like 5 years ago, the incumbents would send their innovation departments or their biz dev team or the corporate development team. And they would come and listen and learn and ask questions and create PowerPoint presentations and go back to the C-suite, to the chairmen and CEOs and boards of these banks and tell them what we were doing. And their internal tech teams would say, we can build that. And the reality is they didn't and they couldn't. They have as much, if not more, data than the agile fintechs, but they didn't use it in a way like we did in the fintech industry. Now, the chairmen of the boards of the banks and the CEOs are calling us directly, and they're asking us to come in and tell them what really happened and what's happening today. And that's why you're seeing so much more investment and partnership and M&A and strategic deals from incumbents with the fintechs. So they know now, given the head start they gave us, that they have 2 or 3 more years to get it together. And that's why you're seeing Visa and MasterCard and the banks partnering with and investing in the fintechs. I think you'll see that escalate quite a bit here as we get to the summer and fall of 2019. Some really interesting conversations between big tech and fintech and incumbents and fintech. Mm-hmm. You're either as excited today as you've ever been, or you're as scared. It's really a fascinating time in the golden era.
So if we loop back to the kind of the Prosper days and the kind of enhanced access to credit that was being created by those sorts of models early on, and then kind of fast forward to today, there are massive companies in the consumer lending space. A lot of fintechs, especially in the U.S., are kind of leading with credit. It's traditionally a profitable product. But we've also kind of pushed ourselves to a place where consumer debt levels are higher than they were prior to the financial crisis. And I think fintech lending, accounts for something like 1/3 to 50% of that. What are your thoughts as to the relevance of credit as the kind of leading edge of fintech versus other ways of optimizing customer outcomes?
That's a great question. And we talk about that a lot in the leadership meetings and board meetings of the fintechs. When I think about online lending, of course, it started with consumer lending, but now we have student lending and small business lending, residential real estate, commercial real estate, litigation finance, art finance, point of sale finance, and so much more. There's a really interesting fintech called ClearBank, which is a bank backed by venture capitalists lending money to the marketing teams of fintechs so that these fintechs don't have to use their equity capital for direct mail and digital marketing and Facebook and all that. And ClearBank then every day takes money back from the fintechs based on the conversion of the marketing funnel and cycle.
So this ClearBank, are they a Canadian company?
Correct.
Okay.
That's right. Run by a fantastic husband and wife team and a really excellent leadership visionary group that I think people are going to be shocked at how well they're doing going forward.
Confusingly, there's a ClearBank in the UK.
Right.
too.
They're different. And so I think that a lot of this started with lending, but what you're seeing now is the rapid dominance of these neobanks or challenger banks. So we have Chime and MoneyLion and Vero and N26, the partnership between the German insurance company and Chinese tech company, and Starling and Revolut and Monzo and more to come, where they're helping people not just borrow money or a line of credit or some kind of loan. They're really working with them. So for example, if you get paid on Monday, your bank actually has the money on Saturday, but they don't give it to you till Monday. And so some of these challenger banks have talked to their customers who really want some of the money on Friday. So why can't that challenger bank lend some of the money they get on Saturday on Friday for some kind of fee? And there's all kind of other things, a LifeLock solution, a robo-advisor solution, financial health solutions, way to pay your bills, and many, many other ways, even getting involved in the interchange fees of the credit card and debit card world, which is very big, very deep. And the banks have hogged that all to themselves. But in this new access economy, sharing economy, these challenger banks are getting there. And that's what I think is so exciting, that I believe, my personal opinion is, you'll see some of these big banks writing big checks and investing in these neobanks. Kind of like you see Esurance was bought by Allstate to be its online brand, and Geico in the insurance industry. So it may have started with some lending, but it's going to go into 9 or 10 or 11 other revenue streams and other products very, very quickly. And you're seeing hundreds of thousands of people sign up with these neobanks each week. It's a big number.
So it kind of feels like in the Golden Age of Fintech model that you propose, we've kind of gone from an era in which people were picking off single verticals, lending, payments, and now people are getting a bit more creative and tackling much larger, more complex problems in financial services. And there are companies kind of building cross-product propositions. Is the third phase consolidation?
So we talked about this at the Lend It conference just yesterday. I was on stage with Steve McLaughlin, the banker from FT, and we talked about that famous picture of the unbundling of the banks, that the fintechs were taking some of their most profitable pieces of business. And the question was, would there be a rebundling? How is this all going to come back together? And so I believe that the banks will always be here. They're important, and they're not just going to become utility companies, but they're not going to be able to rebundle this by themselves. They're not going to be able to just put these buttons on their sites and win back these people, that they're really going to need to invest in and do some M&A and deep partnership. And you're starting to see those banks do that. They realize that they must partner with Credible or Common Bond or SoFi in the student lending industry and in some of these other industries as well. I think that there's a lot to do between incumbents and fintechs.
And I guess what maybe puts you in a helpful position to think this through with is the fact that you're actually investing your own money in these companies. So it's not just, commentary from the sidelines. This is what might happen. This is what I think will happen. But you're actually stepping up, putting your own money behind these theses. So I mean, what What would you say kind of the driving, I don't know, one or two or three theses that you're supporting with your investments is?
So with each of my investments, given it is my own money and I'm a company of one, I have no employees and no other people's money on the equity or the debt side, I really focus on the person, on the people. Do they have a high IQ, an intelligence quotient? Are they smart? Do they retain information and do they learn very quickly? And a well-developed and a good sense of their EQ, their emotional quotient, their emotional intelligence, their ability to see and feel things not said in a room, a very critical skill as an entrepreneur, especially for the CEO, given it's such a stressful, lonely seat at the table. And then, of course, an AQ, an adversity quotient, which is your grit and your resilience. Because as professionals, as entrepreneurs, we get punched in the mouth. We fall down, we make mistakes. And a high AQ, you get up and fight, and you get up and respond and be resilient to the pivots and the struggles of being an entrepreneur. And then I look for a group that can execute and a group that has a mission and a vision and a value, and really a group who's all in to make this thing a success. Whatever success is, it's a hard journey.
Are you making debt investments in fintech?
I am. So I run an 8-figure lending fund that lends into the loans and into the balance sheets and into the capital structure with warehouse lines of 8 different fintech companies. So Clearbank would be one example. Money 360, which does commercial lending, would be another example. MoneyLion would be another example. Quill would be another example. And many others where these entrepreneurs need more debt capital for the lending part or the balance sheet of the company. So a really good example would be a fintech may get a warehouse line or a line of credit from a big lender. And that lender will say, we'll lend you money, for example, at 8% and we'll do 90% of the loans. So the 10% has to be funded either by the equity capital or the balance sheet of the fintech or some other debt provider. And so what I like to do is find the right business, the right entrepreneurs, and go after lending to that 10%.
So that the sort of mezzanine finance.
Exactly. Basically. So that the fintech doesn't have to use its expensive venture money that's probably worth 40%, that we can take that out somewhere between 10 and 15%. That is a real big opportunity in fintechs today to be the mezz level where you're backed by the loans and backed by the equity of the company.
Yeah. You clearly have extensive experience in fintech as a founder and as a manager. What advice, what lessons are you kind of most effectively able to share with the companies that you advise?
So I think people underestimate how hard this is. So you have to raise the equity capital, raise the debt capital, hire the people, get the engineers and the product people to work together, solve for customer acquisition and marketing, solve for conversion, try to get profitable and have positive unit economics, and get to the point where the lines cross over, where revenues become higher than expenses. So I think number one is focus. Number two is really getting the team to work together. I see so much fighting internally at some of these fintech companies. They may be fighting over power or control or who's right or adulation or fame or something else, and really trying to get them to understand that the enemy is not within their 4 walls, that they're all on the same team. Their business card says the same name, that they're all going for the same goal, to get them to learn to communicate, to get them to execute, grow, and succeed, both economically and financially, and for some of them for a higher purpose.
In addition to the capital that you're providing on the equity and the debt side, what other kind of value add do you bring as an investor in these companies?
So I am advising 10 of the 24 companies I've invested in the equity. And for me, advising means not just buying equity in the company and lending money, but spending time with the CEO and the leadership team. I may work with them on fights or challenges they're having internally, or help them hire people, or help them raise equity or debt. So a lot of it is listening and then really giving them other things to think about. Sometimes I'm right, sometimes I'm wrong, but what I'm really trying to do as the old guy in this industry is to help them not make the same mistakes that I made.
Ron Suber, Thank you very much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Safe travels and see you soon.
Thank you. Thanks for tuning in to Rebank. If you like today's show, reach out. Follow us on Twitter at Rebank Podcast and join the conversation. For more on banking, fintech, and the future, check out our regular content at www.bankingthefuture.com.